Hi, everyone. We will get started in a few minutes, but before we get into the presentations and the agenda information, I'd like to highlight some technical information specific to this webinar platform. You should be seeing something that looks like this on your own computer desktop. To the left is the GoToWebinar viewer through which you see the presentations. And then to the right is the GoToWebinar control panel, where you can raise your hand and ask questions and select your audio mode. You're probably listening through your computer speakers by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. If you see the orange arrow in the control panel on the right side of your screen, feel free to right-click the orange arrow to have access to the entire control panel throughout the webinar. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions for today's presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. So we will go ahead and jump right into our presenter information for today's webinar. I want to thank you all for being here today. We're very excited to bring Fort Collins and the Balancing Act to your screens. This webinar will be recorded and emailed to you along with a quick 4-question survey. So I would like to introduce everybody today that's going to be presenting. So my name is Nicola Pavlich, and I have been a program manager for engagement design for Cities of Service for a little over a year. Prior to Cities of Service, I worked as a community engagement coordinator in the Human Rights Department at the City of Dubuque, Iowa. After me, you will hear from Annie Bierbower. Annie is the Senior Coordinator of Public Engagement for the City of Fort Collins, Colorado. Her work is focused on communicating with and engaging all residents of the city, especially the hard-to-reach population, such as youth, low-income, and people that speak English as a second language. After Annie, you will hear from Chris Adams, the President of the Balancing Act. Chris has worked in the public policy and facilitation for over 25 years. His work focused primarily on health and healthcare, but he also supported policy development in education and natural resources. So we start all of our webinars with some fun information about our participants. So let's do that through a quick poll. Pretty soon you'll see a poll pop up onto your screen asking you how your city engages the public around the city's budget. Please take a moment to pick all the relevant answers, and then we'll discuss. All right. Well, this is pretty exciting. It looks like many of you, all of you who participated, used public hearings to engage the public around cities' budgets. It looks like a good percentage of you also do community meetings, which is exciting. And then we have interactive activities and then online deliberation platforms. This is very exciting. So it looks like the group here is not new to public engagement of residents around the budget, which is really exciting. So now let's go ahead and chat about what we'll cover together during this webinar. Because we have a number of participants who are new to Cities of Service, I'll provide a quick overview of the organization and our citizen engagement model. We'll then hear from Annie about her city's budgeting stages, where citizen engagement occurs, and how the city integrated the Balancing Act tool into that process. Following Annie will be Chris, who will showcase the Balancing Act tool through a demo and highlight some key features of the tool. We will then dive into question and answer session. Again, please remember to submit your questions through the comment section at the pane on the side of your desktop. So here's some overview of our organization. The mission of Cities of Service is to help mayors and the city leaders tap the knowledge, creativity, and service of citizens to solve public problems and create vibrant cities. Cities of Service was launched by Mayor Michael Bloomberg in 2009 and modeled after the success of New York City Service. We were created to provide a new mechanism for citizen participation in local governance. We grew from an initial group of 16 founding mayors to a coalition of more than 250 cities in the United States. You may have noticed that we use the word citizen. Cities of Service believes that citizens are residents who participate in their community and who see themselves as an integral part of their city. For us, the word citizen is not a legal term. We also recently put together all of our years of experience around a citizen engagement work into a visual, which is our citizen engagement model. One thing to remember is that we use this model in a fluid way, meaning it doesn't go from left to right necessarily every time in every situation. So what does the model say? Well, we believe that for any citizen engagement strategy to be successful, interest and buy-in is needed from the city leadership. Cities have a wealth of data from citizens, need assessments, and other resources. This wealth of data allows cities to see challenges in the community from a larger perspective and therefore allows the city to identify a challenge or pressing public problem that impacts the city at large. We also believe that effective citizen engagement includes deliberation with the community. Citizens have deep expertise of other communities, and this expertise can be leveraged to name and define the public problem further, as well as drive better services and programs. We also believe that once the problem is identified and deliberation with the community occurred, it is time for citizens and the city to get to work to tackle the problem. Citizen contributions can take many forms, from generating ideas to volunteering their time. And lastly, we believe that any citizen engagement strategy should have a positive impact against the identified problem. The combined efforts of the city and citizens generate real results and build trust, which then sustains future engagement. We have a number of engagement strategies that fall within this model on our website. We refer to these engagement strategies as our blueprints. After the webinar, please feel free to check them out under the resource page on our website. So speaking of our website, if you would like to learn more about the services we provide to our coalition cities, or if you're interested in joining our growing coalition, please feel free to reach out to my amazing colleague, Jessica, through the email on your screen. In addition, you can stay up to date on the resources and our work through the newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website, as well as our social media platforms that are on the screen as well. Now here comes the fun part. I'd like to tell you a bit more about City of Fort Collins, and then Annie will give her presentation. So we first learned about the amazing citizen engagement work Fort Collins was doing around the city's budget through the city's Engage City Award application. The Cities of Service Engage Cities Award is a recognition program that shines light on the growing number of ways city leaders around the world are solving problems and co-creating the future with their residents. In the application, we read about the ways the city transformed its budgeting process in response to rising costs and a desire to include the community in decisions about how their tax dollars were spent. We also learned how the city incorporated online technologies to both inform the public of the budget issues and give them an interactive way to provide their input. I'd like to now turn the webinar controls over to Annie, who will use the next 15 minutes to share some really insightful workings of the city's outcomes-based budgeting.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, thanks so much for coming today. And I'm excited to kind of go through our budgeting for outcomes process and then talk a little bit more about how we used the Balancing Act tool to complement a lot of our other efforts. So if we could go to the budgeting for outcomes, next slide, there we go. All right, so I'm going to start today with just a little bit of that bird's eye view of what our budgeting for outcomes process looks like and how the overall structure works. We started doing this, I believe, about 10 years ago, so a little bit before my time with the city. I've been with the city for about 4 years, so 2 budgeting cycles. We do our city budget biennially. And what we do is we build our budgeting for outcomes, or our participatory budget program, and process off of our strategic plan structure. So our whole strategic plan and everything that we kind of create all of our programs from is built around what we call our 7 outcome areas. And those are listed here, and they range from everything from neighborhood livability and social health to economic health to transportation, and that last one's high performing government. So it kind of covers everything, and you can probably get kind of an idea without me just listing them all with the icons kind of symbolized there. And what we do is, for our budgeting for outcomes process, we have kind of multiple streams of review and engagement that we set up. And our more formalized process is we set up a BFO team. You'll hear me say BFO a lot. That's Budgeting for Outcomes, one of our acronyms that we use a lot. We set up BFO teams internally that are led by staff within the city. And then on each of those teams, we have at least 2 community members, residents that sit and volunteer and review and go through these offers right alongside city staff. And we have one of those teams for each of these outcome areas. It's estimated that being on one of those teams takes anywhere from 50 to 70 hours of volunteer time. So for staff, they're doing that on top of their everyday normal responsibilities. And then our community members are using that as purely volunteer time. So it's a huge undertaking, and we're so appreciative of the community members that do that. And we actually prefer that the community members do at least 2 budget cycles, but we do term them out. We don't want people to be doing 4 cycles, 5 cycles. We want to get as many people in as we can. So we make sure to sort of term people out after they've served for 2 cycles. And a lot of times people go on to serve in other ways too. And go ahead to the next one. So that is happening alongside of our more traditional or community-based public outreach. It's our second stream. We have social media posts and customized outreach that we do based on our different demographics and target groups. Like Nicola said, I work primarily with those harder to reach populations. So I'm really responsible for connecting with nonprofits and organizations that work with those populations, while my colleagues will often reach out to businesses, boards and commissions, and groups of that nature. So these multiple streams of engagement are kind of combined as we go through the process. So all of this on-the-ground outreach is happening. In these pictures, you see our mobile budget booths, which we set up all over town. We do them at public transportation sites, public libraries. We've done them at schools. We go to a lot of fairs and events. And we bring little chocolate coins. You can see what that close-up is. That really brings people in. Chocolate-covered coins, kind of a fun way, penny for your thoughts, talk about the budget. We have people fill out an online paper prioritization exercise. And then we also sometimes, if we're at a location that offers Wi-Fi, we can bring a laptop and have people either do the balancing act, which we'll see here soon, or the online version of this prioritization exercise, because what we really want to do is create different levels of and time commitments for people to interact. So they might be able to have a short conversation with one of us at one of these mobile budget booths, or they can take a few more minutes to fill out the paper prioritization exercise. They can go one level deeper, which would be our balancing act, and then they can go all the way to serving on one of those teams, to going to council meetings, and those other things that might be a little bit more of a time commitment or require people to go a little bit deeper into the budget. Something I didn't cover yet, which is pretty important to keep in mind here too, is that all of our budget offers, those are what we call any budget requests, are what we build this outreach around. So all departments, whether it's an ongoing program or a brand new idea, have to submit what's called a budget offer. And they need to link it to our strategic outcomes, as well as provide data around that offer about why it needs to be funded, how much is needed, if there's additional support, and that's what those budget teams are spending that 50 to 70 hours reviewing. So we are having the budget teams meeting while we're out on the street and online doing all of this outreach. And so each of those streams provide kind of their own report of public engagement, which then goes to the budget lead team, which is made up of some of our financial and budget experts, as well as the executive leadership of our City of Fort Collins. And they spend endless hours reviewing those reports, as well as all of the more concrete data around numbers and projections of tax income and all of these kinds of things to create what is then the city manager's recommended budget. And that is them saying, we've looked at public engagement, we've looked at what our budget teams have said, we've reviewed offers, we've put this all together, and this is how we think we should allocate our money for the next 2 years. And then that final stream is it goes to council. And when it goes to council, it is truly in the hands of elected officials and the community. So what we realize at this point is that is maybe one of the most powerful and imperative times for people to be even more involved. And that's where we really decided to get Balancing Act, make Balancing Act more of a player in the communication. So I'm going to take, if we go to this next slide, just a second to kind of show you an example of what we hear. This is part of what the public engagement report looks like that we submit to that budget lead team and that council can also review. So we get to find out from the community what, based on each of the outcome areas, what their top 2 priorities are. We also make some graphs. This year we implemented a new option for people to say, kind of give us a better perception of how they think things are going versus how they would like things to be. So for every outcome area, they got to say, should the city be putting more resources, the same amount of resources, less resources, or no resources? So we really got to gauge the current perception, which is something we heard the community want to do. They wanted to be able to do more of that rather than just project into the future. They wanted to talk about how they felt right now, what was important to them right now. So that was really powerful for them. Go ahead to the next one, please. So we get into what else can complement all of these other outreach opportunities that we have. And that's where Balancing Act has really come in to complement that outreach for us. And something that we learned through our work with Cities of Service, actually, and going through the Engaged Cities Award process, is how powerful that city manager's recommended budget is. This is a tangible piece of paper, basically. This is a real live layout, line by line, that shows all of this work and what leadership really wants to spend money on. And this is what council is going to be talking about for the next 2 months. So how can people really become involved in that? And Cities of Service helped us realize that that's really a chapter that we need to put some more emphasis around, which we totally agreed with, because we usually kind of close the public engagement, really put it into the hands of council at that point. But we wanted to have people interact with that city manager's recommended budget, find a new way for them to see what that really means, and then be more informed if they do decide to go to city council, or if they don't have as much access to city council, they have all these other opportunities for still participating. So we get about, in the city manager's recommended report, 330 offers, I think, are funded this year. It's over 540 pages long, the city manager's recommended budget. So what Balancing Act allows us to do is tell a story with those numbers and create that interactive story that people can take part in and really talk with everyone. So I'm going to bring up the demo of our tool so you can see exactly what ours look like. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Just double checking. So something that I really appreciate about the tool too is that it always brings up this help and tips opportunity. So even though I'm in the back end and bringing this up dozens and dozens of times because I'm in front of people, this is going to pop up every time. So even though I've been here 100 times, it's going to show if I'm at a public meeting and I can bring up these these helpful tips and show people how the tool itself helps people get started. So what we do to continue with that way of building levels for people to interact is we and this amount, don't be too alarmed by this red deficit at the top. We're updating some of our revenue numbers before we make this live and start bringing it into schools and pushing out for people to talk about with as alongside at council. So we don't really have a $337 million deficit, but we have built what we call themes. Go ahead and close this. So you can go see that we have all these outcome areas, but then we also want people to have another layer in between the themes or the outcomes as well as the themes. Is there a way that I can make this disappear? Sorry, does anybody know how I can see this better? I'll just put this down, I guess.
You can push that orange arrow to the right, I think.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's what I need. All right, thank you. So this is our outcome area, transportation, and these bicycle pedestrian accessibility improvements, bus services, parking availability, traffic improvements, road bridge intersection. These are what we call our themes. So they're kind of buckets to house all of those budget offers within, because we know a lot of people aren't going to want to go and read those hundreds and hundreds of offers. So what we did this year is we went outcome, and then we built our subcategories as themes, and then even one level deeper under those themes are the offers that are actually recommended to go forward according to the city manager's recommended budget. And something that is extra amazing with this tool, we think, is the ability to build out scenarios. And that's what also helps make this a relatable, digestible, interactive activity for people to really see what balancing the budget means. So one big hot topic for us is always, or two big ones, affordable housing and also transportation. So we built scenario questions kind of based around, what are the big topics that people are really wanting to talk about? What is council going to be grappling with? What are those topics that there's going to be 2 lines out the door of public comment for? And we're building them in here too. So should the city increase routes available on Sundays? You can get more information around that. And then you can actually see how changing the hours changes the budgets. So people actually have to see, okay, I do want that, but I didn't realize it was that expensive. It's truly balancing a budget and helping people understand what that means. And something that we also find really helpful, and this is something that's going to be educational moving forward, is that you can show information about the revenue side of things. So here we're seeing where is the money coming from. And we have our base tax. We have a dedicated tax called Keep Fort Collins Great. And this allows you to show a little bit more information about what that tax is. So this was a tax that we put forward in 2010 that is actually scheduled to sunset in 2020. So I'll go into that a little bit more, but this tool is also going to be very helpful for that. And you can go another level in, see what that tax actually pays for. Is that something you want to keep, or is that something you don't think should be as much of a revenue source? We're also able to put more information in something like this. So if you want to learn about what Natural Areas does, we link to a report here. You can put videos in, or you can also show maybe new projects that are on the horizon. This is a project that is slated to be built based on some capital project dollars, and it's our Whitewater Park. And so people can see what's coming as well. I'm going to go back to the presentation. So you're able to see how this tool really provides a framework for council's conversations. It makes us be able to also get feedback throughout this whole process, so we're able to pull reports based on what people spend their money on and provide that to council as needed. But what we really want this to be for the next year at least is a way to help us make budget an ongoing conversation. So we don't want to talk about it for that 3 to 6 weeks when we're doing the really intense public engagement and all these other things are happening. We want to start 5 steps before that and have people be familiar with participatory budgeting and what that looks like and what the city is spending your tax dollars on for the 2 years in between when we're putting this all together. So if you think about kind of the spectrum of interest, I guess, around municipal budget, we kind of try and think about what people at each of these different stages are going to want. So maybe the balancing act isn't something that's going to be the best fit for someone that's right at the beginning of that spectrum. They maybe just are the typical young professional with little to no interest, or they might kind of want to know what's going on, and then all the way to 5, which is that person who has served on multiple boards and commissions and maybe just finished their second term of volunteering on a budgeting for outcomes team. And we think building this tool, especially around the city manager's budget the way that we have this year, and the way that we're going to make it more of a long-lasting, constant educational tool, is going to help it serve people all from like the just beyond the person that's just getting their feet wet all to the expert level. And it's also going to be able to support our other campaigns. So I mentioned that KFCG, or the Keep Fort Collins Great tax. And what we're going to be able to do is get really concrete feedback around if that tax, to really show people if that tax goes away, these are all the services that we could stand to lose. This is what this is really paying for. So if you don't renew this tax in some way, or we don't develop a new way to fill in that funding, these are some new balances we're going to have to consider. And that's my part.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annie. As many of our participants will attest, it's no small feat to update a city budget process so that the public can be engaged in multiple stages of that process rather than just at the end. So thank you again for both applying for the Engaged Cities Award and also being here to share all of your insights with all the participants.
Thank you.
Absolutely. To help us further understand the tool Fort Collins continues to use, we have Chris Adams with us from the Balancing Act. In 2014, Chris and his team committed to building an easy-to-adapt, easy-to-understand tool for governmental entities to conduct high-quality online and face-to-face budget engagements. The team released Balancing Act tool in 2015 and have since added scores of features and partners. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about, or in the same context as Annie with Fort Collins. Fort Collins is a truly exemplary city in terms of its ability to do different and innovative and sometimes very challenging things, and it's been a real pleasure to work with them. One quick thing before I talk about the Balancing Act tool is just to mention this idea of budgeting for outcomes. One of our colleagues, one of our senior consultants here at Balancing Act is Andrew Klein, who used to be the budget director at City of Baltimore and is one of the leading figures in terms of thinking about budgeting for outcomes. And Baltimore, independently of us in 2012, actually created their own online budget simulation and really sought to use this communication and interaction tool and way of getting feedback as a way of doing a lot of the hard things that budgeting for outcomes sometimes calls for, where you're making major transformations. So budgeting for outcomes is a terrific thing, and it's really inspiring to see how cities like Fort Collins are using it to help take it to the next level and get that broader level of participation and input. So as Nicola said in the introduction, I've been thinking about public engagement for 25 years or so now, and we're really honing in on what we think is a critical area, which is the budget, which is just a hard thing for the public to grasp. Not because the public isn't smart enough, it's just that usually budget books, as Annie said, are about 500 pages long for a medium-sized city, and for a larger city, they're 2,000 or 3,000 pages long, and it's just not realistic for people to interact with that in a very meaningful way. And so as we were thinking about what we wanted to try to accomplish, we determined that the keys, that the outcome of what we wanted was that we wanted to help local governments provide a tool so that they could be both informed and engaged. And this isn't just something that we made up. This is something that is actually research-based in terms of some of the positive outcomes that are desired when you go through, when you're doing budget engagement. So next slide, please. This is a slide from the Center for California Studies that looked, I think, at about a couple hundred cities within California on civic engagement and fiscal attitudes. And what they found was that when this document here, that on the left it's got uninformed and disengaged, and on the far right the arrow's a little bit off, you've got informed and engaged. And what it's saying is that when people are both informed and engaged, they're about 5% likely to think that simultaneously that taxes are too high and services are too low. That wanting people to have those two simultaneous preferences, that you want to lower your taxes and cut services. So what this tells us is that when you have people informed and engaged, that they don't believe in magical thinking, that they actually come to understand the rational trade-offs that need to be made, that are, I think, obvious to those of you who work in local government and you see the cost of things and service levels and the performance data and so forth, but it's not obvious to residents. So to the degree that you can get them informed and engaged, that's a major advantage. Next slide. Looking at that same study and that same scale, that when people are informed and engaged, they have a better attitude towards taxes. There's not so much antipathy or so much resistance to thinking that tax money is just being wasted. On the far left, you've got that same scale. About 46% of people who are uninformed and disengaged, based on their assessment, believe that the sales tax rate is too high. But when people actually understand it, and it is something that can be made to be understandable, it shrinks to about 26%. So there's a real payoff in terms of being able to see what you get when you invest in the types of tools that Annie was talking about, and especially like Annie was talking about for Fort Collins, they're seeking a reauthorization of a sales tax that was implemented after the Great Recession. That having this belief in your residents is a really powerful thing. So now, if you'll pass the screen to me, Annie, they're just launching this year's version of Balancing Act, but we've designed Balancing Act so that it can be used in a lot of different settings. One of the key things about a simulation being effective is that a simulation has to convey constraint. And so we've built out a number of features in the tool that I want to give you a little bit of a tour on. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing my option. Oh, there it is. Okay, show my screen. Okay, good. Thank you very much. All right, are you looking at my screen now?
I see it.
All right.
Yep,
looks like you are. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a couple more features about and it's fine with us that it actually makes perfect sense because each local community is different. Just some things that Annie has not been using in theirs, but might in the future. So Annie's already talked about the overall structure of Balancing Act. It's meant to be very visual. It's very deliberately intended to give people a sense of both the spending side as well as the revenue side. And there's some really good research that shows that when people are presented with both sides simultaneously, that they tend to be more rational and that they tend to be more understanding of the tough trade-offs that need to be made. And so some of the great things that are going on in technology these days with government technology things, with visualizations and so forth, we're now integrating into Balancing Act. And so if you open up this is just a sample, I call it Anytown. If you open up this one for the police department, you can see that we've got three different types of questions, or three questions here. One is a question that is sort of a little bit risky in terms of how comfortable would the public be in terms of trying to save some money by having civilians take police reports instead of sworn officers. And if people want to try that out, they can. This is just a sample. You can see what it is as a status quo, which is continuing to use officers, or you can see what it would look like to use civilians. And so once again, this is just a fictitious city, so that's just a sample. But the idea here is that people can sort of help provide some valuation about service level, about how services are delivered. And these might be very hard things for cities to do, cities and counties to do, in terms of making some of these changes internally. But if there can be a way of explaining to the public, it makes it much more likely. Another thing I want to show you is the integration with some some transparency and visualization software. And so this is something that's new as of about 6 weeks ago. But if you click on the blue info icon for the police department, for example, in this one, it says responsible for enforcing laws and public safety. But then if you click on the more details, this is what's new. It actually loads an embedded widget, an embedded graph that is live updating and connects to the city's financial system. And so it starts out by giving a little bit of context. Over the last 5 years, the overall police department budget has increased an average of 0.7% annually. Response time and other metrics for cities of this size are well within acceptable norms. And it says the chart below shows budget to actual breakdown by program. And so, this would actually, if we clicked on it, it would link to even more information. But it's just a nice way of getting some value for transparency. A lot of cities have been doing a lot to provide greater transparency, but this actually gives you a way of presenting it in a way where residents can see how it impacts decision making, and also can see that it's live and very current information. Another thing in terms of providing constraints to people, because we want people to be realistic problem solvers along with you. We want them to think not just about what they want, but about the resources provided and alternatives as well. You can put put some different features on the plus minus questions here. So this is detention, it's essentially a jail service, and if you were to go and click it down to a certain level, you might want to have a warning to your residents that say reducing this expenditure below $200,000 would mean that prisoners would need to be released against state law, and or that state required conditions could not be met. So once again, just an example of how you can provide different ways of understanding constraints to your residents. Moving over to the revenue side, because once again, our research tells us, and this is actually not just our research, but it's through university-based researchers that have been studying budget simulations, tell us that it's really important to give both sides of the equation. We've got some different ways of interacting with material there as well. And so in this case, we've got sales tax, and it's expressed as a rate. And so you can adjust the amount that this goes up or down by however you want. You can have it go down, and in this case, it's set to go up or down by 1/4 point, which is actually a pretty big increase or decrease. But in many places, including Colorado, in order to increase a tax rate, you have to have a vote of the people. And so we want to, once again, convey that constraint to people. So if people hit the plus sign here, you get a warning that says increasing sales tax requires a vote of the people. So we let people make the change, but we just let them know that city council by themselves does not have the authority to do that. You can also leave comments throughout the simulation, which are collected and then presented to the city, and they can use that in their reports. And then moving down here, this one increases and decreases just based on a straight percentage. And this is a brand new one. I'm taking a little bit of a risk because this isn't actually released to our live platform yet, but it's one that we're very excited about. And Annie actually gave a perfect use case for it when she was talking about their need to reauthorize their Keep Fort Collins Great tax increase. This is what we call dedicated funds, and so it looks a little bit different. It's got this this link over here. Oops, sorry, I got ahead of myself here. Sorry, this is a brand new one, so I'm just getting used to it. But what it's saying is that the revenue item is linked to a spending item. And so it asks a question. So it asks it says what the transportation tax is. It was created by voters in 2014 to pay for road repairs and a bus route that circles downtown, blah, blah, blah. And so you can keep it as is. You can learn a little bit more about what the current status is, or you can say, I think I'd like to increase that. So if you increase it, it gives you a special modal that lets you try out either one. And we don't, the thing that our development team is working on right now is filling out these more details and more information sections, but then it tells you what it's linked to. And so this is a really important one. Often there are things like special revenues that can only be used for fire protection, or can only be used for open space or affordable housing, that type of thing. And this dedicated funds lets you compartmentalize that to link revenue sources, and also to show if there were a proposal for some type of an increase to show voters exactly what it would go for. So that's all I was going to do, just in terms of sharing some additional features that you can use the simulation for. Could you now go back to the simulation, or to the presentation, please? And so we're really at an interesting time right now in terms of budget engagement. For the last 30 years or so, there's been a pretty well-researched and strong consensus among folks who study budgeting and budget processes and public engagement that simulations are the best way to engage people in thinking through decisions and understanding financial condition of cities. And if you go all the way back to 1990, Eugene, Oregon did a program called BOB, which is Build Your Own Budget. And it was paper and pencil, and they actually distributed it to hundreds of residents and had really good results with it. But what they found was it was really expensive to administer because it was paper and pencil. It literally was a piece of paper with an item, and people could write in how much they wanted to spend. And so it didn't convey those constraints that we're able to now by using technology. And it also, just believe it or not, they had a lot of computational errors. So it was both seen as a success, but also something that they may not want to continue because of the technological problems. And then moving forward to some surveys that were done in Wichita and I think Omaha, Nebraska in the 2000s, once again finding that these are very useful, but they're also very time consuming and staff intensive and expensive to do. And then moving forward to 2012 or so, when Baltimore did its online version, Johnson County, Kansas did an online version, and that's right about the time that we started thinking about how can we use the scalability of technology to make it inexpensive and affordable to make this available to a lot of different entities. This reference right here to the article is an article that I wrote with Mark Mack, who's a consultant at GFOA, just talking about how we're sort of at this inflection point where you can now have highly interactive tools that can really deliver a lot of the benefits of simulations, but at a relatively low cost and with relatively low staff effort. Next slide, please. This is an example. I just love this quote so much. Kansas City, Missouri was one of the very first entities to work with us, and we've learned a lot from them as well. This is a picture of one of their community budget meetings that they had last year, where they put people at round tables, and they had all sorts of different devices, including phones, and they were able to go through balancing act together as a community and sort of think through these decisions. And what I liked about it was this quote from their budget analyst, a guy named Adam Blom, and realizing that I think a lot of local government folks on this call, worry about residents not trusting government, and there's a lot of that, and I think especially in this day and age when there's real concern about institutions. But I guess I want to just acknowledge that it goes both ways as well. There's some concern among local government about whether or not they can trust residents with something as complex and potentially as volatile as the budget. And what we're finding is that yes, when you provide people a framework to have this conversation, if you give them a PDF that has 2,000 pages or 500 pages, probably not. We've heard some terrible stories about some budget hearings that just end up either being unattended or people just get angry because they don't understand. But if you can find a way to sort of frame up decisions for them, provide a productive way for them to participate, you can actually get thousands and thousands of people doing this in a reasonable way. I just talked to somebody in Milwaukee County a couple of days ago, and they launched a budget engagement in early August, and they have had 5,000 users spending an average of 28 minutes on site, which is just remarkable. But getting back to this picture, what I loved about it is this comment. So he says, the amazing thing is that residents are almost silent as they go through the exercise because they're concentrating so hard on making these decisions. And so I guess the leap of faith that maybe I might encourage, without trying to be too glib about it, encourage local governments to try, is that I know sometimes local government officials are treated a little bit like punching bags, but what we found is that if you give people a way to understand and interact, that they can be trusted and you can be trusted, and it becomes a virtuous circle, and sort of a similar way to the engagement model that Cities of Service has that Nicola presented earlier. So that's really all I wanted to say. But it's been really fun to work with Cities of Service and with Fort Collins, and we think budgeting for outcomes is a great thing, and we're all about trying to support these positive changes.
Wonderful. Chris, thank you so much. More and more cities are working to find ways to engage citizens in the work of government. So to have a tool like Balancing Act only makes that work smoother, easier, and more fun. So thank you again for being here with us. We also want to know, we know that many of you on this webinar are actively engaging citizens in solving public problems in your communities. If you would like to have your story shared through a webinar and other ways, and also have the possibility of being awarded the Engaged Cities Award, which comes with a minimum of $50,000 in prize money, please make sure to check out the Engaged Cities website, which is engagedcitiesaward.org. With that, I would now like to invite us to do some Q&A. Go ahead and write your questions into the questions comment box, and we'll get to those. And I have one of the first questions is, I think this one is maybe can go to Annie, is how long did it take to get Balancing Act ready?
Hi, that's a great question, and that can vary quite a bit. So we rely on Chris to help us quite a bit, depending on the different stages that we're in. So once you get all the content you need from your departments, one of the most time-consuming aspect of that for us is and still is confirming all the revenue side and how we can make that, how we can kind of separate that into those categories of revenue. So we're really structuring, there's all these different buckets, right? But how do we show sales versus use tax versus the intergovernmental agreements? Once you determine what those categories are and can ask your budget department for the numbers, as well as get the spending side content, that's more the time-consuming part. Building the actual tool is actually very efficient and not time-consuming at all. You can even upload Excel spreadsheets that will populate the categories and subcategories according to your needs. So it's pretty easy, and you can go back and edit things pretty easily as well. So you can go through and add those scenario questions. The back end, the CMS, is just very user-friendly and easy to work with. And we purchase a couple of consulting hours from Chris, so we are able to rely on him if we do run into anything that we're just not sure what's the best, most user-friendly way to set this up, or do you have any examples of how or he can show you examples of exactly how the spreadsheet needs to be set up, so you can just import that directly and have it all come in the way that you're wanting it to. I would say that once you have all the content you need, which will of course vary greatly, the actual building of the tool itself only takes, especially if you use the Excel import, just 2 to 3 hours type of thing to get that first foundation all set up. And then you might have to go back in and do scenarios and things like that. But it's very easy to build the tool itself.
Beautiful. So it sounds like the tool itself is... Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. I just wanted to say that Fort Collins is a little bit atypical. It's not completely unique. But Fort Collins, the lead agency or lead department that's doing this is Annie through communications and engagement. More typically, we work with a budget finance function. And what we found is that it works very best when there's a close collaboration between the two. And so Annie, I think, brings this great skill in terms of thinking about engagement and also communication. Typically, the bones of the simulation are built by the budget finance office, and then it's sort of sent to the communication engagement function to do kind of the fine tuning and to make sure that things are clear and understandable, and that they're really asking questions and presenting the information in a way that it can be interacted with. But it works either way. But we found that the best solution is when both those functions work collaboratively together.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
For those of you who don't want to type your questions, you're welcome to press the little hand that's on your control toggle to the right of your screen. There's like a little hand on the bottom. If you press it, we're going to be looking for your hand, and then we can unmute you so that you can ask your question through words instead of through text. But while we wait for some hands and any other questions, I do have one more question, which is, how do you ensure that what the residents, how are you ensuring that the residents know that their participation isn't the final word? So like when they vote or make comments through the tool, how do you let them know that this isn't going to be the final, they're not making a final decision?
I can answer that a little bit. I'm sure Chris can elaborate some, but I think that's overall communication. We work really hard when we're doing those presentations, when we're pushing this out on social media. We make it very clear that this is a simulation, this is an activity, this is you learning, this is your say. It's not you voting directly and then it's just going to be set up exactly like that. So I think that's a big part of just the overall communication and way that you present the tool. The tool actually provides, once somebody goes through it and they complete their own balancing of the budget, it brings up a little individual report that really shows the person, here's what you said, and I think Chris will have to verify this or not. I don't know if they get to see how they stack up to other people at that stage or not. But what we do is after we're done with it, we show people what we heard. So I think that's part of helping people understand that too, that it's not you just making that definitive answer, it's you and all these other people that are doing the activity, and then that's being put forward as one part of what we rely on when we're making these decisions.
No, I completely agree with Annie that it's all just about how you present it to folks, and we really haven't heard too much. We haven't heard any real complaints about people being confused thinking that they were actually setting the budget. That people understand that this is their opportunity to provide input, but really the processes of the city are how it's set through the city manager and the council ultimately. And Annie, interesting that you would mention, the way that the additional ways that we could provide input to people about how theirs might stack up to the proposed budget or to even others. That's actually a feature that we're working on right now to sort of give people a sense of where they are versus their peers and where they are versus a proposed budget. So that's an exciting new feature that we're hoping to go into design phase here in the near future on.
Awesome. That's an exciting feature. Sounds like a lot of cities will benefit from it. And a question came in through our question box, and it says, how are the results of the simulations captured?
I might want to take that one because we also, just about 2 months ago, we just released a new analytics module, and I'm not sure that Fort Collins is using that. They certainly haven't been using it since they launched their new one, but it's really exciting. And so it was intended to provide a lot of drill down so that people could get deeper and deeper levels of information. They could have the quantitative information displayed next to the qualitative. And this is a problem that we didn't anticipate 3 years ago when we started doing online budget simulation, is that generally only about 10, like if you think when you go to a website and you click around and you learn something and there's a submit button, only about 10% of people actually hit submit. We usually have a little bit higher. We're usually around 15%. But the problem with that is that it meant that 85% of your users we weren't capturing any data on. And so we've now created a new interface that or not a new way of collecting data. So if somebody goes through and spends 10 or 15 or 20 minutes on the site and hits submit, we record that data and we keep it separate because they've met the constraints, including the constraint of submitting with a balanced budget. But we also take a snapshot, whether somebody's signed in or not. We take a snapshot so that we know that, so if somebody leaves, we take a snapshot every 30 seconds so that we can then also present that information to the local government so that they can see how people who submitted their information answered or responded versus those who just clicked. And it's actually been really interesting. And we also provide additional statistical analysis, such as looking at the median and a lot of different types of information on that. It's actually a very exciting thing. And we're even working with some budget software makers to be able to take that data and put it right onto a to a dashboard in budgeting software, so that right next to performance data and financial reporting, you can also have input from public engagement on a particular item. There's some really good stuff going on there.
Fantastic. And this will be our possibly last question. If you would like to ask a question and you don't want to type it in, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. So the next question that we have is there a way to provide neighborhood information for people who make proposed budgets?
I might need a little bit of clarity around that one. So is it, are they asking the people that, for Fort Collins, say the department or the project that is creating that budget request or offer, if there's a way for them to use neighborhood information? Am I understanding that right?
Matt, we're gonna unmute your line, and if you can speak, we would love to know what you were thinking.
Yeah, no, I was actually just thinking, you know, if a resident were to go on and kind of play around with the budget and do a finalized one, would we be able to drill down to get neighborhood information? We'd like to see if there's trends, if neighborhoods, you know, groups of neighborhoods are saying, you know, we'd like this money to be spent more on this, rather than just as individuals.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. So at the end of the demo or the end of the simulation, you can also, when you're building your simulation, you can add demographic questions, and it comes with a set already built in, but you can edit them. You can edit any and all of the questions for however you would like them to be set up. So the City of Fort Collins has a set of standardized demographic questions that they always use if we're getting demographics from the community. So we can easily build those in and include a zip code, maybe the council district that people live in. You could even drill down further and have people, I might have to ask Chris about this. I don't remember if you can do a pretty extensive drop-down menus, but if you have very well-defined neighborhoods, you could maybe even do a drop-down of the neighborhood names and have people select all the way down to that level.
Fantastic. Well,
yeah, so you can absolutely. I'll just say one more thing. Just quickly, one of our very next developmental tasks is we're going to, after spending 90 seconds on the simulation, we're going to have a map pop up, and then we're going to ask people to drop a pin sort of approximately where they live, so it doesn't get too creepy, like we're not asking where their address is, but just kind of drop a pin near where you live, and then we're going to get longitude and latitude, so that you'll then have a very precise sense of where people live, and that's also very exciting.
Beautiful. Thank you to everyone for your questions. Once again, I want to give a big thank you to our wonderful presenters, Annie and Chris, for your wealth of information and commitment to engaging citizens in local government.
Thank you, and thanks for putting this on.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a reminder to all the participants, you will be emailed a recording of this webinar along with a quick question survey. Please take a few minutes to answer the survey so we can keep improving our webinar offerings. With that said, we hope to see many of you at our future webinars, and I hope to read some of your Engaged Cities Award applications. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
All right, bye.